Welcome to Carla 2020. All of you who are watching us and all of you who are in our excellent panel, which is we are women all around the world. And my name is Liisa Holmberg, and I'm working here in Norway in the International Sami Film Institute as a film commissioner. And we have 5 women all around the world. We are very far away from each other, but still we are very, very near each other, because we are sort of, we are all having a very important work, and the work is carrying our stories, Indigenous stories. We are supporting, carrying, and making the stories available to ourselves, but also to other people in the world. And I can say, as an Indigenous filmmaker, that the Indigenous stories they are important, keeping this globe going on, keeping this everything on good hands. So welcome. We have people in New Zealand, Australia, we have people in Greenland, we have people in Canada and US, and also in Samiland. So we are all around the world. I'm starting so that you will shortly introduce yourself first before we are starting the discussion. So I'm starting from my point of view, the very farthest point. I'm starting, you Libby, you are there in New Zealand. Welcome Libby, Hakaraia.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou nā tai tama wahine. I nā tuakana to my most respected and senior sisters in terms of what we do as storytellers. I greet you all around the world. It's really exciting to stand here on my homelands here in Otaki, New Zealand. I am a festival director here of Māoriland Film Festival, but I'm also have worked in the storytelling, Indigenous storytelling, Māori storytelling across film and television for the last 25 years. And so I'm actually really, I can't tell you how excited I am for the rise of us as Indigenous storytellers. And also when I look at this panel and see the women, as you said, Liisa, across the globe, and there's so many more, I just couldn't be more excited about this panel today. So I greet you all. It's winter here, it's cold. I look at those that are outside and I feel, extremely happy that there is sunshine where you are and water around you. So that is where I live. I live next to the ocean on the west coast of New Zealand near Wellington. So tēnā koutou.
Thank you, Libby, and welcome. So we are going to them next to you. We are going to Australia. Penny Smallacombe from Screen Australia. Welcome.
Thank you, Liisa. Penny Smallacombe, 6 a.m. here in Sydney, Australia. Currently sitting on Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation, but my people are from the Northern Territory. I'm a Maramaningi woman from the Northern Territory, as I just mentioned, a small area called the Daly River region. It's really lovely to be zooming in and seeing all your beautiful faces from around the globe at all your different time zones and seasons. It is a cold winter's day here in Sydney, not nearly as cold as New Zealand, I'm sure. But look, I'm really pleased and very grateful to be invited to be speaking on this panel with all of you today. Thank you.
What does it mean, cold in Sydney, cold winter day?
Well, cold for me, okay, so cold in Sydney today, I think it might be 17 degrees.
Plus.
Plus, never minus.
Summer. Pipaluk, what do you say? It's summer in Greenland when it's plus 7.
And I think it's very warm and it's 15 plus degrees.
Well, see, where I come from traditionally in the Northern Territory, we don't have winter. It's tropical. We only have wet season and dry season. So cold for me.
Yeah. It's
So,
yeah, everything is so different with that. So we are in the Arctic.
Yes.
Pipaluk, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Pipaluk Jørgensen. First of all, thank you so much for having this discussion and panel today. I'm so glad to see all of you, and I've met you, all of you, different places in the world. And but yeah, I'm from Galatlit, it's Greenland, and I'm a filmmaker first of all, and a director. But started the first production company now in Polorama, where we do production service now here in Greenland. That's the first company that will try to do an industry up here. And so we started Polorama Greenland now, and that is very exciting. And beside that, I had Caritas Production, my own company, for 12 years, and I just renamed it to Uno Film, my son's name. And then yeah, there I will be my like creative part as a screenplay writer and director, and the other in the producing part, and has Nuuk International Film Festival as well. So many hats on. I try to not have so many hats on for the future, but
just keep them.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, thank you. And then we go to the other continent. So Heather Ray, you are in America now, Idaho?
Yep, I'm in Idaho, which is my home state where I grew up. And although I normally live in Los Angeles, and I am on Limhi, Shoshone, Nez Perce, Nimpu, Snake land. Although my own tribal roots are in the American Southeast, this is where I grew up, and not in this particular spot. But I'm also here with some of my nieces and nephews who are from Coeur d'Alene tribe up north, and Rocky Boy Reservation in Montana, and just enjoying the summer. And so I'm so happy to be with everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you, and so much respect for everyone that's here, and for everyone who's going to be watching and listening. And I'm excited to be a part of this conversation, so thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely. The water behind you is so lovely. And then we have Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, Puolespohtiin Elle-Máijá. You are the bridge, you are the Sami in Canada. Where are you?
Mulle läppe mun idealla just goes mulle. I'm not sure where I really am right now, to be honest. Where bjäivi, where is it, where ehkit, Gihto, Liisa ja Carla. I'm somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. My plans changed, and so I'm driving home to Vancouver right now, and I'm stopped in the Rocky Mountains. It's really beautiful, as you can see. Yeah, I'm a filmmaker. I'm sometimes an actor, and I am from Ghana, or Kainai. It's part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm also Sami from northern Norway, from Unyarga. And it's an absolute honor to be here on this panel. I feel like, I'm amongst pretty incredible company. So thank you so much for inviting me to sit on the panel. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome all of you. So let's go to this discussion, which is about another way to tell stories, Indigenous storytelling, and why the Indigenous stories matters in the world. I'm starting with you, Libby, again, about you have worked very much with the Maori storytelling. You started the Maoriland Film Festival, and then you have had this excellent project Through Our Lenses. Tell about little bit about your work.
Yes. Well, like everybody here, we wear many hats, and I think for me, when I came up through the television industry, because, well, I came out of radio into television and always working in the Māori broadcasting area, it was a really, we were always trying to bust the doors open with the mainstream broadcasters. And after a while, you get cynical, you get tired, but you also realize you're not really making much space. There's not a lot of space, because as soon as you get through the door with a project, it's very hard to bring other people through. And so I was really, clear on why we wanted to own the screen by having a festival. And I'd looked to Imaginative in Canada and to Smallacombe and where you are, Liisa, and also just thinking about who our audience was, all those sorts of things. So 7 years ago when we started Māoriland, it was great. We had the screen and we could, bring our Indigenous friends and, have this big celebration. And then it became really clear quickly that the rangatahi, our young people, were watching us and watching us closely. I live in a village of about 2,500 people who identify as Māori, speak the Māori language, in a wider community of about 6,000 people. And so, those young people came to us in the second year of the festival, and they were working alongside us and said, where's our festival? We want to watch films that have been made by young people or, appeal to us. So it was them. They came to us, and this was in our own community. They started curating films. They started watching films from all over the world, and it was really, really evident that we needed to respond to them. So we tried to run a film school 101. I remember it clearly because we called up all our mates. We had, Briar Grace Smith there, and we had Ainsley there, and we had, like a lot of people that you will know as Māori filmmakers. And there were about 12 of us, and we stood in front of a group of about 60 young people. And I have to say, it was a bit of an epic fail. It was an epic fail because we all kind of like stood around at the beginning and said, "Oh, what do you want to talk about? You talk about this, you talk about that." And we had them for about the first hour and a half. And then we could see these kids just slipping away. And it was like, oh, here we go, old people talking to young people. And we thought, no, this isn't going to work. And so over time, we put young people in front of young people. And what we saw in our own community was our young people, like it took courage and confidence for them to stand in front of their peers. But what they were doing was showing what they knew and sharing what excited them in terms of storytelling. And then we thought, well, what happens if we actually, in terms of building their confidence as storytellers, what if we took them off their own nation, off their own land, and over to another Indigenous community? So we went to the Pacific. We went to the Pacific Islands, and the first place we went to was Rarotonga. We took 4 young Māori filmmakers, and I'm talking about age between 14 and 23. And most of them were on the young side, so between 14 and 18. And they stood in front of these rangatahi in Rarotonga, these young people in Rarotonga, and it was like their hearts bursting out of their chest. And even though they didn't know much, and they stood there and said, look, we don't know much. We don't know much about the gear or anything, but let's make something, and they were young people making stuff with young people. And then we took them to another group to Tahiti, another group to Hawaii, and another group over to Samoa. Different communities, different culture, different language. And what we saw was that all of those things didn't matter, because how our rangatahi, our young people, engage with other young people is they start with game. They start with icebreaker games. And the joy that fills the room, the spirit that fills the room, then they start making stuff, and it's their lens. And like we just, the grown-ups stood in the room and just marveled at these kids, because honestly, let them loose. They're digital natives. They've grown up with gear. They know what stuff is. You don't have to explain to them a frame. And what's exciting is there's no rules. They don't have any boundaries like we did coming through the media, coming up.
That's a very good job. And then you took them here in Samiland last January.
Yeah, we took them there. And, like
our young people and work with our young people.
Yeah, and it's a connection. It's a real strong connection, that because our young people come back to New Zealand and they've grown immensely in confidence, in their dreams, And they talk about, you know, my one of the young people said to me yesterday, she said, oh, I just want to go back to Inari.
Oh,
I just want to go
welcome.
Sami, you know? And so I know that they can dream of those connections.
And it was 36 degrees below, minus.
Below.
It was, and they were filming outside. It was nice. It was good. And they were doing the traditional about our clothes and things, those people. It was a short time, but was a good result. So there is a new generation coming in Indigenous filmmakers. Heather, you are a very successful filmmaker and producer, and you have been working in America and in Sundance Institute. Tell about why we need more Indigenous producers, Indigenous driven projects.
Absolutely. Well, I think that what you said very specifically too is something that I've been really trying to work on and thinking about a lot, which is we do specifically need producers, in fact, because a lot of young folks, like you were referring to, Libby, as far as a generation coming up, going to film school, a lot of folks are focused on directing or even acting. And there's something about that producing role that's so important for a few reasons, one of which is producers are people who pull everything together. They are folks who are, you know, doing the work to put all the pieces, the parts together. And secondly, producers really protect storytellers. And you know, I've seen enough instances where Native or Indigenous filmmakers, directors, storytellers have really needed that support and that protection. And it can be challenging to find. So I think it's one of the most important roles because it's how we create power in these industries that we're in. And so it's something that I've been talking a lot with about, you know, Bird Running Water, who runs the Indigenous program at Sundance, who's one of my, you know, compadres for many, many years. And we've worked together more than 2 decades trying to make a difference in the US. The other reason why I think it's so important to your question, Liisa, is that, and I would say this is probably a global phenomenon, but I'll be specific to North America, to the United States. There is a precedent set of non-Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories. And it's the anthropological effect, you know, it's the phenomenon of anthropology. It's in the roots of how our industry began. Some of those earliest films that were made 120 some years ago were made by effectively anthropologists telling stories about Indigenous people, whether it was Nanook of the North or, you know, films about people in Papua New Guinea or wherever it was essentially this kind of observational sort of storytelling, the observation of the exotic, you know, frankly. And it's been hard for us to get out from under that over this past century. I mean, we work very hard in this country in particular, but I think it's the same in Aotearoa and many places where, you know, we're trying to get out from under this anthropological lens and have sovereignty in our ability to tell our own stories and to have power. So I think it's really important, you know?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, the anthropologists, as a Sami people, and they were coming from the little village, I was learning English because we had so many anthropologists there all the time, and I was helping them before I learned so much English that I read those reports which they made about us, and then I got angry. But but Penny, you are working in the Screen Australia, and you have been working a long time, and you were the first who made the protocols how to work with Indigenous people. So you have been the savior of the of the Indigenous stories in your part of the world. So tell about your work.
Sure. Yeah, well, look, I've been, personally, I've been at Screen Australia for 6 years, but the Protocols and Pathways Guide was actually created before my time. So really, we have to thank Sally Riley, who was the former head of the department, along with one of our most fantastic intellectual and cultural property lawyers, Terry Janke. They really kind of set out to do the work for the Pathways and Protocols booklet, which of course came about for that very, very reason. Up until about 15 years ago, the vast majority of content, and that's right across the board, even in the media, film, television, children's content, was all, and documentary content as well, was all made about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people mostly by non-Indigenous people. There were very few hours of content that was actually either written or either directed, and like barely any at all that was actually produced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There's very similar to you in terms of anthropologists have always had a very keen interest in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and all the early, very, very early ethnographic films were made about us and not with us, and to the point where many people, elders, when you go to various communities, they're really media savvy. You know, as soon as you throw a camera on, people know exactly what to do, because we've been so well researched over the years. But sadly, many of the people I've spoken to in many communities around, an interview was done with them, some footage was taken, and the vast majority of the time they never saw the footage. They never even saw what the end product of the film was. And more often than not, this content was never shared with them. It was never shared with the community. It was never ever from a community point of view in terms of something that we wanted to look at within ourselves and who we are, and also what we want to showcase to Australian and international audiences. So the protocol guide came about that there were so many non-Indigenous people making films about us that the guide really wanted to give people, a little bit of a pathway about how to do that appropriately, and how to do it in a more consultative way with Indigenous Australians. It's funny, and it depends on who you speak to, because after Sally Riley, Erica Glynn took over the role, and she had a slightly different point of view. She kind of, which I see both sides, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, because we kind of worried that we'd given them a guide to us. Yeah. Where perhaps maybe we should have not given them the information they needed to make more films about us. Because the more things that they do incorrectly, the more things that we can point out that they do wrong in terms of how they, what their perspective is of us. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in regards to protocol guides, how great they are. Now that I've been at Screen Australia close to 6 years, and I'm sort of coming to the end of my tenure now, which I've really loved, we are focusing more on providing information and guides for our Indigenous communities, so that they know what to do and what to ask of people coming into our communities. They know what to push back and say, well, actually, we don't want to just be a consultant on this project, and I'm not just going to have you give me a couple of $100 and that's that, but I want a credit on this film. If I'm going to be someone that's managing you in my community, then I want to be like a unit manager. Or if I'm going to be reading your script, I want to be a script editor. So we're trying to provide information for our communities on how best that they can make sure that the process isn't really about consultation anymore, but it's rather about collaboration. Because we understand that filmmaking and screen content making is very much a team sport. And we know that it's always going to be made up of very dynamic teams of Indigenous and non-Indigenous. But we want to make sure that anything made about us has been made with us, And also at the same time that we're putting this new guide together for Indigenous people to know what they should ask for and what their process of negotiation is. We're also working exactly as sort of Libby and Heather has said on the number of producers that we have. We've had 3 rounds of an Indigenous producer program. It's a really big push for us because not only do we want to support Indigenous writers and directors to make amazing content and feature films and TV series, children's content and documentaries, but we want to own content at the end of the day as well. And we want to be able to exploit it for our communities. It is our IP and these are our stories. So, you know, the shift, there's a shift that's definitely happening right now with not just wanting to tell stories, but us really wanting to own them as well. So it's a really exciting time.
Very much to think about. We are working in our guidelines now in the Sami protocol, and Pipaluk, you are working in Greenland, and you have the Greenland somehow it's hot now. Filmmakers want to come there. It's you know, wilderness now, the new wilderness.
Yeah.
So
the new Inuit wilderness. Yeah, like I love that there was this protocol actually, and I understand how the vice versa of it, because I can see, like in Greenland, it has many years, there's been so many stories, especially like in documentaries and people telling our stories, like with a lot of money coming in, and we have barely none in Greenland to make films. And if you look at like 100 years ago, like when the film just started, like one of the first film that was like filmed in the world was up here in the Arctic, and that is just like, it's still like that. But we will change that, and we are changing that. The other thing is that we have tried to build up an industry for the last like 20 years, we can say, but the last 10 years we have really been wanted to try to have an institute, and inspired by the Sami, of course, and festivals, as well as Imaginative work with them, and Libby as well, and you guys. So everything is just like in this connection of all of us talking today. This is the outcome of like changing the industry. I think is the most important thing, because we learn so much about each other, and we have the same mindset on thinking on contents, and sees sometimes in humor, or sometimes in like just know the quietness in something, and here can you, like, it's so similar, and it's so important for us to stick together to tell the stories and to the next level, and to take the power. And I think what we are seeing now in Greenland is we have worked, I've worked with we had a film GL, which is our like association, and we work really hard as well for the youth to have a film workshop here, and it started 2 years ago, and it has really developed, like people wanted to make films now, and they just have a workshop for kids as well, where it's like 32 kids making films. So that is amazing. Another thing is that we are trying to, we still under Denmark, like we are still in the Kingdom of Denmark, so we are not an independent country at all. So that means want to make films here has been so hard, like money-wise, because when we took home rule back in 79, the first thing we took back was culture, of course. And then they're just like this high political way of saying now you cannot apply of any money to Denmark for making films, and they have like 100 million Canadian, I can only like in Canadian dollars, right, a year to make films, and we have less than 500,000 euros, right? So there is a power element there, but they want to do so much film here, so they are making like they can have so much money from the Danish Film Institute and go in and make films, or the broadcast.
Yeah, many Danes are coming to Greenland to make films, and
Many, yeah.
and they get the funding. You don't.
Yeah, and they get the credit too. Like, and there's some things you don't want to touch, and now we will try what me and my partner Emilie Hadling-Peona is trying to do now, is that how can we be a part of these films that we know will come because they're already there? How can we be very close to the project, even though that is not me as a director or anything, but when we will try to co-produce. And a plan of mine was, we have this big Hollywood project now. There is a big TV series that wanna go in, and what I have tried to work on for a year, and I think that is a really important thing, is how can I be a screenplay writer and get the credit of being the writer on a project that is so huge, because then you can change the little things, and the little things in story of like, always this alcoholic have to be in it, or then they have to, like, couldn't it be because he's depressive or there's something else, and not like all these stereotypes wanna, like, it's so small lines to change, but it's so important for my view to put it on. So we will try to now go into the writer's room as well as the producing part. Okay. And I think that is very strong. And I think there are, it is beginning now to take some power back.
It's good, because I think we all can discuss about this, and Heather and Penny can give you more examples what happens and how to take the power back. But I'm going to Elle-Máijá. They're in the Rocky Mountains. So Elle-Máijá, to me, you are always the young filmmaker, no matter how many years it's going. You are always, I'm so proud. You are a Sami young talent who is now in the member of the American Film Academy and everything. Your last film, The Body Remembers, when the world broke open, it won almost everything. And so tell about you are half Sami and half Blackfoot, and so you are double Indigenous. And then you have directed and acting, so you are double there also. And then your last film, The Body Remembers, it was amazing how much you break the rules. Like long shots, and the main character, you lost her in the end, and so on. So tell about that, your process. Is that an Indigenous way of making film?
Well, thank you for everything you said. There's so much that everybody's been saying that I want to comment on, I guess, before I jump into my process. I think what Penny was saying about the Pathways and Protocols document kind of being a double-edged sword, it's so true. And in Canada, we have the Indigenous Screen Office now, which is an incredible advocacy organization. And we have the Pathways and Protocols document here. And as a creative, as a director who's moving into, I'm producing my own work as well. As a creative, I receive sort of nonstop emails and requests from non-Indigenous people wanting to tell stories with Indigenous content. And the Pathways and Protocols document was a major turning point for myself and for, I think, all other Indigenous creatives here in Canada, because we suddenly had this document that we could provide these non-Indigenous people with and say, here is how you can respectfully engage with communities, here is how you can even begin to think about telling these stories that don't belong to you. But I really appreciate what Penny's saying about developing sort of the next step, which is how our own communities can respond to these questions. And I'm so curious to see that document because I think it's going to be such a powerful resource. The Pathways and Protocols document is also a means of accountability, which I really appreciate. It's a way to hold non-Indigenous people in the industry accountable. And then what I'm hearing from everybody is these brilliant interventions and interruptions and ways to sort of change the status quo and the way that I guess colonial thought processes have sort of molded this industry that we're all, I guess, reconstructing in our own ways. So I think in terms of my own process, I've just been doing it in a way that feels natural and authentic and organic to the ways that I work with my community and the ways that I work with story. And I think my process is also replicating these, I guess, these unique ways of interrupting the industry and holding interventions in the way that we work. And so with The Body Remembers, it was about narrative sovereignty in so many ways. It was about intervening the ways that Indigenous women are perceived on screen, especially when it comes to violence and victimhood. It was about showing these delicate moments of silence when there's so much that's being said without having to say anything at all. And yeah, it just, to me, was a way of telling a story in the most nurturing and loving way possible that reflects the nurture and the love that I see from all of the Indigenous women around me and in my communities who hold my people up. So the process was about that, was thinking about how can we tell a story about trauma, how can we tell a story about violence without inflicting trauma or violence on our audience and on our crew and on our cast. And so it involved everything from doing an Indigenous history workshop and cultural competency training for our whole crew, because obviously you end up having to work with non-Indigenous people. It's the nature of the industry. We had elders present for our youth who are on set. We had Indigenous youth mentorship project where we had 11 young people working creatively and collaboratively with the head of each department to continue to build capacity, because we're severely lacking Indigenous people working in sort of the key technical departments. We have a lot of writers and directors and now producers coming up, but we don't have, say, enough people working in sound or editing or you know, any of the technical departments. So the process for us was about building capacity and working in a way that was grounded in love and sort of a nurturing respect for everyone around us.
Mm. You definitely did very well, including everybody there, because the film was so big success. So you could see how you have had all our guardians with you. You know, in our Sami, we have many powerful guardians, which has been, and of course, I think Blackfoot, maybe they have more. So that you had the power to include all these things, like having those workshops and include people in this hectic film team. It's an incredible big thing. We should all do this the same way. Do you think, Heather, that it's possible in the all Indigenous filming?
I hope so at some point. And I have to say that everything I did was just building on everything that everybody did before me. So it's, I think, you know, as you said, to you, I'm this young filmmaker, and I'm 35 now, but I'm you know, that was my first feature film. And I'm in this interesting moment here in Canada where we've had so much advocacy coming from the Indigenous film community for, you know, 20 plus years. So I've had fantastic mentors to sort of lead the way. Danis Goulet, for instance, has been really important in helping me sort of come to where I am in my career, and everything that I'm doing wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the advocacy that's happened for the last 20 years. And so suddenly funding bodies and film institutions here in Canada are being held accountable and being forced to recognize that there are other ways of doing things, and that it's time that Indigenous voices lead the way in telling our own stories, and that is essential to narrative sovereignty. So yeah, I have to say I'm witnessing a really interesting and important moment here in the Canadian film industry as an Indigenous creative.
Okay, are you witnessing the same? For example, Heather in the United States.
Yes, part of what's happening here in the US right now is that there is an emergence of Indigenous content creators that are actually stepping into, opportunity, and quite specifically to television. I work with an organization called Illuminative that was founded by Crystal Echohawk. The organization is entirely research and data. It's founded in research and data. And from a lot of our work in the research space with Dr. Stephanie Freiberg, who's one of 2 Indigenous social scientists in the United States, PhDs. She's from the Tailfeathers Nation. But from a lot of this research, we've learned, that Native people in American film and television make up 0.1% of representation. It's a kind of deplorable erasure, and I often refer to it as extermination by narrative. In other words, it's effectively a continued process of extermination, but in this way, it's just about erasing people. And the small screen has a lot of power. A lot of people are watching the small screen right now. I mean, in particular, with the global pandemic, we can't even go to movie theaters in so many countries. So seeing a shift that I would qualify this shift being in what I would call a post-Standing Rock world, we're just starting to see now opportunities and openings to where people are actually creating content. Folks like Sterling Harjo and partnered with Taika Waititi, and folks like Sierra Ornelius creating a show for NBC Universal for Peacock, partnered with Ed Helms. And there's myself, I have a deal at Amazon, and I'm creating television content at Amazon. And there's a number of people now that are stepping into that space. And that's really different, because I have for so many years endeavored to find a way to work on television, and was consistently told that Native stories didn't have an audience in the US and in the global marketplace, that there wasn't interest in this content, that it wasn't commercially viable. And interestingly enough, with Illuminative's research, one of the things that we learned was that almost 80% of Americans want to know more about Native Americans. So suddenly you have this extraordinary gap in a market share between 0.1% being seen on screen and almost 80% of people wanting to see these stories. So one of the really powerful things about that research, when we first learned this, for me, it was a kind of devastating and triumphant moment, because I realized that I'd spent 2 decades being told this kind of internalized rhetoric that was completely rooted in white supremacy and systemic erasure that wasn't even real. It wasn't even based on anything real. It was a devastating moment for me, but at the same time, like completely, revolutionary. So that is part of what's changing here in this market right now.
So yeah, to us, they are saying all the time that the Sami people, you are only 100,000, so you don't have an audience. And then we can say, and look at Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, look at Amanda Kernel, and so on, who has a huge audience. We have the same thing here in Sápmi, that we have started to work with NRK, which is the Norwegian broadcasting company, and now they are putting lots of money for the real Sami TV series and so on. So the shifting is happening here also. So what about Penny? or is there, how can you see the distribution and how your films are going through the Australia and then in the world? I know you have many box office films coming or having.
Well, yeah. Well, hopefully everything's on pause right now. We're slowly creeping back into production.
Yeah.
And I actually went to the movies. I went to the cinema last week. So things are opening up, which is really exciting for us. But exactly as Heather has said, I think the small screen and series scripted content has really been a game changer in Australia. Sort of Redfern Now was a TV series, about 8 years ago, produced by Blackfoot Films, completely written and directed and produced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that was the first narrative series that was done on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, our public broadcaster here. And that was a big game changer for us. Because exactly as Heather had been told, as Rachel Perkins had been told, that there was no one interested in watching Indigenous content on primetime television in Australia. Of course, Redfern Now was made. They brought in Jimmy McGovern from the UK to kind of story produce over the top, to really kind of help us, kind of massage our first narrative scripted series for TV. And since then, we've definitely had a drama series on primetime TV, or a narrative comedy series on primetime TV every year since Redfern Now, which was about 8 years ago. So we're in a really fortunate position now where we have quite a few writer-directors that have great writing credits under their belt and great directing credits, and also production companies as well. So that is really, really exciting for us. We also have a renewed interest in Indigenous stories. So the audiences are definitely there, even though they said they weren't. However, we are up against, we're up against our own success, really. Because feature films have done well, our films that have been, written and directed by Rachel Perkins and Warwick Thornton, because they've done well, and Wayne Blair for the Sapphires, because they did well in the box office, and because our TV shows rated extremely well. Mystery Road and Total Control last year won the primetime slots for the year. We're kind of at the detriment of our own success now. So there is a renewed interest from many non-Indigenous companies wanting to tell Indigenous stories for the small screen, and wanting to pull in like one or two of our Indigenous writers into their writers' rooms, which are majority made of non-Indigenous writers, the non-Indigenous production company.
What are you doing about that? Is it okay that you can put your own people in the writer's room, or?
I think, I definitely think there are people that have had some fantastic experiences where they've gone into those kind of writers' rooms where they might be working on a TV series. Maybe there's just only one or two Indigenous characters in the series, it's a YA series or something like that. It's not just completely steeped in Indigenous storytelling. So I think that there are people that have had great experiences, but more and more I'm hearing about people that have had really not so great experiences. They're the only Indigenous person in the writer's room. They're usually quite junior or quite green. So they feel a little bit out of their element in terms of being able to push back in terms of character traits and to make sure that things aren't stereotypical in terms of situations and placement of our characters in screens. So
do you think they have power there? Do you
well,
think people
you know what? It's definitely dependent on the production company and their ability to make it a safe space for Indigenous people to share our points of view in those writers' rooms. At Screen Australia's Indigenous department, I get more funding applications for scripted series content than we do for anything else. We're receiving a lot of emails from Netflix Australia and from Amazon in the US that are looking for talent here on the ground, which is very exciting for us as well, because, you know, we are desperate to get our big kind of, you know, Netflix or Amazon series, you know, up off the ground soon. Hopefully we'll have something very soon. So it's a very exciting time in terms of the more platforms there are, the more doorways we have to be able to tell our stories. But it's also a time that we, you know, that our really talented writers and directors are really picking and choosing the work that they want to be a part, and making sure that they're only a part of teams that really are interested in authentic storytelling. So, you know, it's a good time, but people are feeling a little bit used and abused in our TV and scripted world right now. So we're mindful of how best to protect people.
Yeah. So, Pipaluk, you said you have been in the big Hollywood production as part of it. Tell a little bit about it, and then if Libby can tell about what is happening in New Zealand, what kind of productions, Maori productions, do you have?
Yes, it's two things. I think one of the things that is very important for us as well is to use one another for projects, like talk to one another, like in this forum that we have, or other projects that will come, because this project that came from Hollywood, they asked me just this kind of fixer, kind of lining things up. And I said, oh, you should definitely have an Inuit writer on it. And somehow it goes to Vancouver to some agency, and it ended in the Qeluk, and then it ended at me anyways. So it's just so good with this network that we are building, because we know one another and what we are, our abilities on working hard and want to tell the stories and have a new way of telling stories. So it was important. I'm working on this for a year now, and we're almost there for production, and I'm gonna get credit for the writers in the last episode of a big series. So that is a way that I really want to go and approach on being the writer in these kind of projects that there is already happening. The other thing is that using one another, like for the producer part, we always, and we are missing producers a lot, and I've been producing for many years and really try to not having so much producer hat, but I have to sometimes. But I found these two amazing producers, Alethea and Stacy, which is Inuit, that did the Grizzlies, and we know like each other's culture. We are cousins, right? We are family. And then we made Jason Rao at Imaginative, and now I have 3 Canadian producers on my project that will be like this Indigenous 3 producers and me as a director and writer. So I think to find these kind of collaborations is really important in our like Arctic, like we have the E-Fund as well, is somehow could open up, but as well in Canada. I think Canada has a really nice structure at the moment of trying to engage with Indigenous storytelling, try to have some funds there. So it is very, I'm looking forward to have like the producing part set in Inuit hands. So
yeah. It is the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, which we have been launching with you, Greenland, and Canada Media Fund, Sundance Institute, and the Russian Saha Film. So it will be one of the keys to get the funding, so that we are not so depending on, for example, our.
But not even the funding. But it is really about like the connection in it as well, to try to talk to one another in like every project there will be in how to navigate the directors or producers in one way, like for projects, because every one of us hear of so many stories, even it's Indigenous or it's just like help one another, strengthen one another.
Yeah, but now we are in the new situation because there's big meeting points like Berlinale, Imaginative in Sydney, in Mauriland, in Skapmakovat here. They are not existing right now, so we will see what is happening, where we will meet again, because those were the places we really got to know each other. So Libby, tell about productions.
Sure. Look, I just wanted to I'll pick up the point first that you just said about we're not meeting each other. I've had more, and I'm sure everybody here has had more meetings over the last, this disruption through the pandemic that have been so mind expanding, but also project expanding. And so I've actually found that I've been able to reach more people in a global sense and have more meaningful conversations about productions, because in May, we actually launched the production arm of Māori Land. And again, this is in response to, we pivoted and looked around in our community. Our festival was disrupted. So we put our pitch competition online, and all of a sudden we had 23 projects. And I was like, and they were, the pitches were fantastic, all online. The pitches across New Zealand from Māori that we'd never even, filmmakers, people we'd never even heard of before. When I say filmmakers, they were pitching a film idea, but what we were getting were storytellers. And I think that's the great disruption for us, is that, we get hung up on these labels, which we don't feel comfortable with. Oh, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a television documentary maker, I'm a producer. But actually our oral traditions here in Aotearoa and across the Indigenous world is that we're storytellers. So I call it the rise of the storytellers. COVID has led for us to the rise of the storytellers. And so all of a sudden these storytellers arose, and we were just gobsmacked. And so it activated us to set up a production arm. Out of the production arm, we created a slate, and within that was at the beginning of May. By the end of May, we were funded for the first time. We went for the very highly contestable funding that's only given once a year for overhead development through our film commission. And Māori Land Productions was born. And on our slate, one of our films is a creature feature with a $25 million New Zealand budget. And the writer, he had written 4 drafts over 4 years. In lockdown, over 6 weeks, he got up to draft 12. I mean, he just sat in his bedroom, Māori writer, and wrote a storm. This young writer is a script supervisor on a lot of television and film production, but he got an opportunity to write his thesis, master thesis project. He graduated 3 years ago, but this was his thesis. And it's a pre-colonial, primordial New Zealand. There's not even a mention of any other people. It's Māori all the way. And it's a creature feature. It's a monster film, and it dives straight into all our deep traditions that span across. There is no time content, there's no time continue. It's Indigenous thinking all the way through. And I went, holy moly, this is a rocket, this is so exciting. Next thing, I'm pitching it to a international genre festival, and talking to Hollywood and talking to people all over the world. I couldn't see any of them, of course, because you pitch it and then you get all these meetings. And so I was up at 5 a.m. doing all these meetings, and constantly meeting non-Indigenous Hollywood type producers who are saying, this is an amazing story. We want to know more. Can you send us the script? And I said, no. Can't. I can't until I've got the rights sorted. We're not giving this away. We're going to work on this. And so we're right now at the very kind of end of working on a rights. So we've got obviously the sale and purchase agreement option and all that sort of stuff, but now working on the back end of the Indigenous rights, what we as Indigenous people want as rights. And so when I look at this and I talk to I've talked to Weta Digital and Weta Workshop, and we're in this situation where we're holding on to every part of it. So yes, every part of it will have a Māori, in department, if not heading the department. But we also want to work with the world's best. We want the world's best storytellers around us. Because if we're going to make a monster film, the first New Zealand monster film, we're going to make it like the first Māori monster film, we're going to make it kick-ass so that we smash the doors open, but that's one project. The other projects, you know, that have come through are equally exciting, whether they're short film or television or the convergence of platforms, all of that sort of thing. But it just gave me, because I, like most of us, you know, producing is a thankless task. But I can see a way that we can actually share this across, you know, it's not, and this is just Māori Land Productions, but I know that that's happening outside of us as well, because I look at the latest funding rounds from New Zealand On Air and New Zealand Film Commission, and there has been a strategic, and this is coming from government, this is coming from the government down to the agencies, to support diversity of voices, women telling stories, taking the helm, Māori, you know, diverse voices across so it's an exciting time, and we have to grab all of it, you know, we have to grab all of it. And then I just wanted to talk to a project that happened last year that I'm so excited about and so proud of, and that is the feature film Cousins, of which I was the Māori producer on. So, you know, Cousins went through Sundance and was supported there. It's helmed by two Māori women, you know, Briar Grace Smith, who also wrote the screenplay, but Ainsley Gardner, and those are well-known women in the film world, both in the non-Indigenous and very much in the Indigenous space. But that has taken 22 years for them to create that film. 22 years. It started with Merita Mita and Patricia Grace, the writer, and Rhonda Kite and other women, you know, film producer credited women in New Zealand to try and push this film up, and they just got shut down, constantly shut down. And it took new energy, Māori women, to push it up and out. And that led to a really interesting experience for me as a producer, as the Māori producer, you know, asked by Ainsley and Briar to come on to look after the protocols on set. Yeah. You know, as a woman, to be asked to do that, you know, I had to really ask myself, one, do I have the cultural competency? Now, we all know what that means in our own terms, to stand up and stand in front of a crew every day and start with a Māori prayer and Māori thinking and say, you know, I wanted to touch on what you said, Pipaluk, you know, the most important thing, and I think Elle-Máijá said it as well, is about having a community and changing it up, taking the toxicity as much as you can out of the room, asking people to look at each other and work together. And all of that is, you know, it's humanity writ large, but our film industry, and I have to say, when I hear what you're saying, Penny, about burnout and toxicity, you know, I don't know if that's the end result for Indigenous people. I don't think that we're made to do that. I don't think storytellers, Indigenous storytellers, can exist in a space that is about competition and where's the next job and how do I walk over you and how do I ignore the most important thing that makes you who you are, you know? And that's our gift to the world, if you like, to remind people, as Elle-Máijá said, that we want to make stories with love. And sometimes the hard stories that we have to make take all our love. You know? They take everything out, and you fall over in a heap at the end of it, and you think, I never want to make another film in my life. So disruption for me is, who is our audience? Why are we making our films? COVID has given me an opportunity to go, holy heck, I don't want to work on that. I don't want to work on that. I don't want to work on that. I want to work with our community. Yes. And I want to make stuff that's so important to us because it changes. You know, so, you know, they just going over here for a second. When you look at these, you know, these countries and the way they've reacted to the pandemic, and, you know, some thought leaders are saying that women leaders, women prime ministers, of which, you know, we all can mostly be proud of, who stepped up and actually looked at their country as a place of, you know, not just about business, but about people and their health and their health, you know, and then they went hard and they went first. And I kind of had some result. And I'm not, you know, this is all changeable, but what I'm saying is, as women, we need to step up in that same space, because that's what we're born to do, and hold it in a different way. Take the toxicity out. We are doing it, and we are
starting to come. Libby, we are. We are, most of the Sami filmmakers are women. And also Inuit filmmakers and so on. But what you were saying, now we are talking millions and billions dollars and so on. And Heather, you are there working in the big giant Amazon. how the indigenous voice is coming out from Amazon.
Well, Amazon has new leadership in the last couple of years. There was a former regime who, all of whom were ousted around Me Too issues. And then a new regime came in, and it's a very different group of leaders. And, you know, and I think that in so many of these spaces that we're talking about, and I'll include this country, leadership is a real issue. And, you know, I do have such strong feelings about, you know, what it means to presence Indigenous leadership. It's a way, or it's, in my opinion, an act of restoring integrity in so many spaces on the lands that we come from. It's part of the reckoning that needs to happen. And in addition to some of the spaces that Elle-Máijá was mentioning, I think that the executive body of a lot of these different institutions and companies, corporations, you know, studios, agencies, we need to be thinking about those spaces as well. And I have had an incredible experience working with Amazon. There's a lot of integrity within the people that are working there. But I do feel strongly, and I'm consistently saying, there needs to be Native people that are in these halls, you know, or to this point, you know, working from home. But Amazon, this is the one thing that I'll say that's interesting. And this is going back to this idea that we talked about as far as anthropology, because I myself have very strong feelings about mitigating anthropology. That being said, I know we have to work together and we have to work with our allies. In my opinion, in terms of Indigenous representation throughout the world, specific to the United States, we truly need all hands on deck. We need anyone and everyone we can get, but it just has to be done responsibly and with integrity, which is why there needs to be process and a broader discussion around process, which, you know, many of the documents that you referred to as far as protocols, Jesse Winty and all the work that he's done in Canada with the Indigenous Screen Office, these conversations are so important. I recognize the complexity and like everyone has discussed, agree with both sides. But in the Amazon space, I've been working in kind of parallel ways, which is doing everything I can to bring Indigenous voices in, but also working to help some projects that are existing to make sure that they're bringing people into the writer's room, they're bringing those voices in to help with cultural content and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting journey right now.
Okay, thank you. We have to, little by little, stop this panel, and the last, but very short, what is the most important to Indigenous storytelling to get, that we could get a small screen or bigger screen or whatever screen, but that they are coming out and our storytellers can work so that we are telling our stories? Very short, what is the most essential thing? I'm asking you all, but Heather, you can, you were telling it already.
I'll just be very brief, and there's a lot of noise, I apologize, but I think that one of the most important things, there's a few things. Pipaluk, you said something about all of us being connected to one another. I think that that's so powerful and so important. Oftentimes we hear the same thing about the numbers game, the kind of there are so few of you sort of narrative. And the reality is that Indigenous people are the world's second largest population, second to people of Asian descent. So I'm always questioning, well, what vanishing minority are you referring to? Because that isn't real. You know, I think we have to be connected to one another. And why I think it's so important that we are telling our own stories and honestly oversubscribing to the point where people are seeing so much Indigenous content they're uncomfortable. Why I think that's so important is because we have to be powerfully contributing to narrative change and powerfully representing the presence of Indigenous people in this world, and really not participating in these erasures, because what we're doing when we're creating our story, when we're creating content telling stories, is we are designing the future. We're narrative designers. Storytellers are narrative designers. We're creating images that are designing the future. And I think that we have an incredible responsibility in that, and an incredible opportunity. to help to create a future. That's what I would say.
That was a very, Penny, what are you saying?
Sorry. Look, I think that very much along the lines of what Heather's saying, I think it's a really exciting and really interesting turn of events in terms of having the streamers and having them show some interest in our stories. So for many of us, maybe some of our local broadcasters have been not so interested in working with us, but we can find international partnerships, which I think is very exciting. I think international collaborations are going to be a thing of the future that I'm truly very excited about. We are working with the New Zealand Film Commission. We are collaborating on an anthology there. New Zealand is working on another anthology in Western Australia. I think that there's some really exciting future scripted series and even documentary series that I'd love to see that crosses all of our various territories and boundaries around similar themes that we're all looking at in terms of survival and youth and, you know, language, revitalization and environmental issues, particularly with our traditional knowledges. And I think that's going to be something very exciting for larger platforms in terms of work that we can collaborate together on. I also think that, you know, we are trying to concentrate more on our pathways to audience. The audiences are there, you know, as years ago, Indigenous content was considered extremely niche. Now niche is the in thing. So suddenly there is room for us to find our global audiences with our supposedly niche content, which isn't niche. Our stories are universal stories. They're just told through a different gaze, which I think more and more people are going to be excited about, and more audiences are going to be excited about going forward. I think probably the most important thing as we sort of open up the world to international funding and financing and storytelling partnerships is that we just hold that truth that Libby was talking about in terms of who we are as Indigenous people. What are the stories we want to tell and how do we want to tell them? And when do we want to tell them? I always find that there's a really Western time constraint of rushing. Oh, we have to tell this story now, otherwise it's never going to be told. With us, it's the story will be told when it's ready to be told by the Indigenous people that are ready to tell it at that moment in time. So, you know, I think that those international collaborations and us being allowed to tell the stories on our terms are the most important things. Specifically, the last thing about Australia, we're having this really amazing time where we're retelling our historical stories. Yeah. We're retelling our frontier massacre stories and our stories of survival, which haven't been told from an Indigenous point of view. And I think that this is going to be so important, following on from what Heather said in terms of our responsibility to be able to leave Indigenous people and our non-Indigenous, you know, fellow Australians, you know, a real storytelling and a real historical perspective of actually what happened in this country, and maybe create a better understanding of who we are as Indigenous people. So lots to look forward to, basically. And during the pandemic, I think we've all taken really advantage of the time that we have to develop creatively. So I think that what's going to come out of this is going to be very, very fantastic.
Thank you. There are many important things. And then Libby, what is the most important? How many most important things do you have?
Yeah, I too absolutely believe in the power of Indigenous collaboration, and I would like to see capacity building as something that we can do together on our terms, because we don't have to have the conversation that starts with, you know, or the explanation constantly. So I would really like someone listening to be able to fund a co-collaboration, like an Indigenous global collaboration around our producers. I would really love to be able to, You know, recently I took part in a panel that was actually an ABC panel on producing on, you know, a screen. So it was, you know, here I am sitting in New Zealand, getting the 101 on, you know, producing from some of the best Australian producers. You know, we can do, we with the capacity building around our producing to enable all of us to tell these stories. The other thing is about rights. I think collaboratively, if we were to write, and this is moving on from the Sami Declaration of Indigenous rights and storytelling, we, you know, that document, we've got, you know, some way along the pathways and protocols, but without the rights the way that we want them, that are then, you know, and that is really important to get that right. And I think hearing what you said, Heather, you know, knowing our, you know, turning the statistics as part of our collateral to be able to stand up, you know, to stand up strongly and say, this is our audience of 400 million Indigenous peoples. But we also know we have a lot of people coming over to our space wanting to see our stories, you know, and so story sovereignty to me is about protecting all of those things, because they came, we know they came for, you know, they came for our lands, they came for our waters, they came for, you know, the things within our lands. Now they're coming for our stories. So we have to lock that stuff down. Lock it down. Because we want to share, but on the way that we see it, these are not things that we make as individuals that we're going to share a story, make it as a member of a tribe. You know, we still exist.
Thank you. And Pipaluk, what are your thoughts?
Yes, there's so many things, but again, this collaboration of us. And then one thing here in Galatlit or in Greenland is like for our own communities to believe in us. Like that is something there is missing, especially here. Like we don't have a culture politics in film. We don't have an industry yet. We have a little bit of money, but it's not like, I actually heard someone saying from my own people saying, oh, people make clothes and we buy clothes from other countries. Why can others not make films about us? Like, and it's just, I've really been advocating here in my own community for many years now and try to make a change. And I think that change have to be faster. Otherwise we are losing, like, this is Greenland at the moment is open, wide open. We don't have any rules of anything. We don't know which production companies just coming in, filming, taking things out, like, and we're not a part of it. We have tried to build something up, but we are so leaking of leadership in that department in where I am. So that's why, like, I have I never give up, but still.
Don't give up.
No, but I'm seeking to Canada now. I'm seeking to the Sami. I'm seeking to you, right? Because you hear where we want to be, and I know we have the same struggles government-wise. But I think it's very important for the government now, especially here in Greenland, and with Arctic, that we have to have a support and a good structure for us to not give our stories away, like, because that is totally open now. What we can do, and we are doing, is that we are trying to take, like, again, we do a production service company, and we are working with Iceland now because they have done the service for many years. So how can we have a one gate to know which stories that are out there, because there are many. When we go to Balinali, we see 15 scripts or something about Greenland, and we don't know what is that story, right? And so I hope for the future, and again, this international production is out there, and it's for us to reach them and see what it is, so we can change the narrative in it, because that there is a responsibility for, most of all, for Greenland to step in now. So that is like, but I'm glad with this community we are already bonding. So
yeah. Thank you. And to me, the most important is everything you said. I love the idea that the stories we are telling, we are making the future. Which story we are telling, there is the future, and we believe in that. And this international collaboration that the globe, the whole world is so small to us. We know each other like many years, and so there are, without you all, we would be much, much weaker. We are alone. They're saying that we are many, and they are saying, no, you are not so many. So it's so important. And but also to me, one of the most important thing is this, what is the Carla 2020 conference and festival themed inclusion and diversity. To me, the inclusion is that why can't we include ourselves, like you Pipaluk said, to those organizations which are making the decisions, like in the northern countries. I would love to have Sami people in the film institutes inside making the decisions, also inside to the governmental bodies, to the Ministry of Education and Culture. Why not? Where are our people? They are not there, because that's the inclusion, that's the real inclusion. So, but thank you, all of you, and thank you all of you who are watching and participating, Carla 2020, and we are saying goodbye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.